Hey, warm and friendly hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in segment number 2 and in a few minutes by one of our good friends, Rocco Miller, who does such great work over at Bracketeer.org. He's going to be joining me to chat about what we've all seen here in the first few weeks of the off season. I'm going to highlight the fact that it feels like a lot of the, shall we say, down the totem pole teams in the Big 12 and also the ACC have had themselves really nice starts to the offseason. We're going to highlight some of the teams that have been very active. Tennessee very much being one of them. And for Tennessee, this is not going to go in the final segment. We're going to cover this one right now, but they got yet another ad as they were able to get Terrence Hill Jr. on Sunday. He was averaging 15 points, 3 assists per game. So we'll talk about how big of a surprise that's been. We've also had a surprise with LSU not signing anyone here in the transfer portal thus far. So we've got a lot of ground to cover with him, and we're also going to chat with him just a little bit about the process in general, how we've been seeing everything come together for some of these teams, and why there have been teams, much like an LSU, much like a Kentucky, that have been quite silent here in the offseason. Then in the final segment, I'm going to get you guys a recap of all that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, whatever you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. We'll keep this first segment relatively brief. We didn't necessarily have like one team that had an absolutely rambunctious Sunday, unlike what we saw on Saturday with UConn, really having some big moves. And we've got a lot of ground to cover with our good friend Rocco, and I just have 2 breaks to get in. So we're going to get a short segment here, and then we'll get into the meat of it on the flip side right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by this man, as we've got our good friend Rocco Miller aboard. He does such great work over at Bracketeer.org, covering this great game of college basketball all 12 months out of the year. I know that he's doing a great job looking at all that we're getting in the portal right now, and he helps a lot of these teams in terms of their scheduling when it comes to the season as well. So he's a very valuable resource to be able to talk to because he's got so much knowledge of everything that's happening in college basketball right now. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at his first and last name, Rocco Miller, the number 8 all together. And Rocco, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Appreciate you, Greg. It's always a pleasure to be on with you, especially here in mid-April as we are trying to sort out what's happening in this sport. You know, the transfer portal opened 12 days ago. It's still fast and furious. I think the big topic right now is when this play 5 in 5 years rule officially gets passed. All of a sudden, we have a bunch of players just sitting in the portal waiting to be recruited, whether it's Aiden Mahaney or a bunch of guys like that. And I think that's why you're seeing so many schools stay patient and holding some spots. You see like LSU right now. I don't even think they have a single player still under Will Wade. So I'm fascinated by all that. I think that does end up getting passed. But man, it's just been crazy on the different approaches.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned that. It has been stunning that LSU has not signed anyone whatsoever. But for these teams that have not signed someone, I know that they're probably trying to be able to get a little bit of a better bargain on some of these guys in terms of the NIL. But how much do they have to fear as well that the pickings are going to be slim and they just get passed up if they haven't signed anyone as of now, like LSU has not?
Well, I think it depends on your actual attainable board, right? So it's almost like a little bit of a war room set up within the teams, with obviously compared to a sport like football, much smaller list of players for each position, but you still have it broken down by ones, twos, threes, fours, and fives, how they fit, schematically. Do you want to play two bigs together? If you're at the top of the sport, that's obviously the trend now. You saw Vanderbilt, for example, go out and get Dak from Colorado. I thought that was a nice piece to go along with Berkey from Nebraska. So again, that's probably another team we'll see use two bigs together, much like the national champions Michigan and Final Four members Illinois and the great front court at Florida. So that's the overriding theme at the top. But teams in the next cut, whether it's lower end of Power Five or upper end of like mid-major plus, I think they're building their rosters with a more Moneyball style approach, right? And hoping that the price tag comes down on some of those key targets. But even if so, there might be a number of players still on their board that are just kind of waiting in the wings for various reasons, whether it's a potential returnee from last year or somebody coming up from a lower level, maybe somebody a little bit slept on. So it's interesting because I think in order to commit to a school right now, there has to be money attached in most of these cases. And in the other cases, both the school's got to commit to the player and the player's got to commit to the school, not just one side like it used to be where a player makes the decision. It's really got to be a dance between both sides. I've talked to some coaches about it. They're having players come on campus, and instead of the old school, like, hey, we have all these facilities, this is such a great place to be, it's not like that anymore. It's a lot of cases now. It's come hang out with us for a day and let's see if we like each other. And no hard feelings if you go home and need to go somewhere else. But it's really a dance between both player and school right now. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's very interesting the way that recruitment has changed over the last few years. Now it's sort of like, oh, come hang out with me at the bar. If it works out, we'll go grab drinks once again. If not, hey, you know what? There's some other people that enjoy good quality beverages, as we do have our good. Yes, absolutely. As we have Rocco Miller, who does such great work over at Bracketeer.org, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And certainly LSU, and I would say their lack of activity in this case, has been one of the more stunning things that we've seen here in the offseason. But what else has been a surprise to you? Whether it be a team that's been inactive, like I think that Kentucky is towards the top of that list, or a team that's been very active, like I just did not see Tennessee signing this many guys. And boy, they have really done a good job in terms of revamping that roster here in the offseason.
The biggest surprise to me, like thus far, was the fact that Louisville was able to get Badunga and Shellstad as a package deal from the same agency. Certainly, Badunga going to the portal in general away from a blue blood was a little shocking in general, just because you're just not used to seeing, one of Kansas's most important players, if not their most important returning player, just say, sorry, I'm going to the portal. And there's a team like Louisville who's gung-ho, of course, about basketball and obviously very well invested. But just to see that all go down, and not only the way it went down, but also to get a key point guard as long as Shellstad can get back to full strength. I mean, he was clearly not only one of the best point guards in the country in the Big Ten, but he's a veteran with tournament experience. Just amazing. Like, no matter what you think of Pat Kelsey as a coach, the ability for Louisville to go far in next year's tournament is kind of clear where the vision is, and that can be a player-led run. They might not need all the X's and O's that the majority of teams will also need to get to a deep run. And so that's been impressive. And like you said, Tennessee just added Day-Day Ames, who's a lights-out shooter. Terrence Hill Jr., just recently from VCU, of course, had that monster game against North Carolina in the 19-point comeback. We know about Tyler Lumblade. Miles Rubin, a shot-blocking supreme, obviously had a disappointing campaign with Loyola Chicago, but we know how good he is. He's been the best shot blocker in the country just a couple of years ago. And then Haralson from Notre Dame. He was supposed to be their next Marcus Burton. They get him to go into the portal and come to the Vols. Interesting way it all shook out, because I actually expected them to land Mr. Foxwell from Portland, who actually just signed with Arizona State here in the last 24 hours. So just fascinating how all the chips fall. But on that note, great pickup for Randy Bennett in Arizona State. They know Foxwell better than most, coaching against him in the WCC this year. I think he'll be a great catalyst, just an understanding of the game well beyond his years coming from Australia. And we saw it all come together in the great upset of the year against Gonzaga. So excited for that, and excited to see what the Sun Devils can also add, because I think as long as Randy's healthy and all in on coaching this program with Rick Croy as an associate, with Joe Rahone as an associate, they're going to be really, really tough to beat. And I just want to see how it translates in the Big 12.
And I'm so glad that you highlighted that, because I feel like there have been two conferences in which their bottom teams have really tried to get better here in the offseason. And the Big East, obviously, as well. Like with the Big East, Providence, what they've been able to do. Holy crud. And Xavier's had some nice signings as well. But what stands out to me is the Big 12. The fact that they got so many great coaching hires here in the offseason. You mentioned it with Arizona State. I feel like Casey Alexander was a great hire. Cincinnati, list goes on and on. That was solid. But the bottom of the ACC seems to be spending more. Pittsburgh has signed about 500 guys at this point. It's absolutely insane. Boston College brings in Luke Murray, and they've just recently added Brandon Benjamin. They've added a few other guys. It feels like these two conferences, the bottom teams, have really decided to go all in on college basketball, and they're trying to be much better for this upcoming season.
Yeah, the Boston College thing I think is the big story, because if you looked at all of Power 5 last year, entering the season and maybe at different points of the season, we would probably unanimously agree it's the hardest Power 5 job. Certainly the least amount of chances to put that roster into the NCAA tournament. Earl Grant tried, I think, 4 or 5 years, couldn't get it to get above water, nowhere near 500. And so for them to not only go get Luke Murray, which was unbelievable, now they're backing it up with a real plan. And I don't think they've had to break the bank to bring in a lot of these guys. Money Williams was the first domino from Montana. And again, if you're Boston College, that's a great player to build with. He can clearly fill it up and score, gives you a fighting chance in any game in the ACC. Obviously, he can shoot poorly as well and lose on those particular nights, but they don't have to put it all on Money Williams with the way this roster's come together. They get Colby Duggan to come from College of Charleston, and he was Campbell's leading scorer before that. A really, really accomplished player in the mid-major level, should make that natural transition to the ACC. Brandon Benjamin, I saw in person at Fairfield. That's a true freshman. This kid is unreal, really unstoppable on the boards. I think that should translate. And then we'll see what we can get out of Ernest Shelton, who won a lot of games at Merrimack. I think that's good. He's a high IQ player, good passer, understands zone concepts. We'll see how much Luke Murray is going to throw out these guys X's and O's in the beginning. But I think by conference play, they'll certainly have everything worked on and be really ready to make some sort of move in the league. And then J.P. Frankel signed from Northeastern, another nice piece from that area. Gets to stay in Boston, right? Doesn't even have to move really. And so that's a nice natural fit for Boston College. So those 5 together so far look really, really good, especially from what we're used to with Boston College. And again, I don't think any of those guys individually cost $1 million, let's say. They probably got a pretty good bargain on each of them and just got them to buy into Luke Murray. That alone can save you some money when you have a great coach and the kid just buys into what he's selling. You can actually get players at a little bit less. So I think that you're seeing a little bit of that so far at BC, and it's been pretty awesome.
Yep, it certainly has been. Boston College has been down for so long, ever since they lost Al Skinner so many years ago. Man, it has been a long time for them. So good to see them spending, and finally a little bit of excitement with that program, as we've always got excitement when we've got Rocco Miller aboard. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And Rocco, we've talked about some of these marquee teams as of right now, but when it comes to mid-major ranks, a lot of these teams, they have yet to be able to get on the board with a ton. Obviously, High Point has been spending, and High Point is right now spending like a power conference team. My goodness, it has been incredible. But who are a few mid-majors that you're looking at right now that have been able to have themselves a nice start to the offseason? Because as well as I do, it's a little bit more difficult for the mid-majors to be able to sign. Typically, they get, for lack of a better term, a little bit more of the leftovers, the guys that fall through the cracks. But have there been a few teams that you feel like have made a few good signings here to begin the offseason?
Well, I don't know if they qualify, but we'll start with Oregon State. I think they're kind of the Boston College of the West so far, just in terms of being able to get a talented player like Legend Smiley to follow Coach Plank, who's now the associate coach at Oregon State. They both moved together now from San Francisco Mexico to Corvallis. You look at Jackson Rasmussen. I think he's the highest rated recruit in the history of Idaho Vandal basketball. He's a local Idaho kid. So to get him to stay in the Northwest, but move up a level to the Pac-12, the new Pac-12, really awesome get there. And then you see Daniel Freitag just recently come in from Buffalo, who I thought was the X factor. When Buffalo went to DePaul and pulled off that Big East upset early in the season, and we had the coach there at Buffalo, Hal Kovich, join our show on Field of 68. Freitag was the needle mover for the program. He started at Wisconsin, obviously crushed it in the MAC, but had some injuries down the stretch, which really kind of derailed Buffalo's chances. They ended up a 7 seed, I think, at the MAC tournament. He was never fully the same, but if he can come back to that form, he could be an all Pac-12 player, in my opinion. You look at Dennis Evans, who, again, he's not the most dominant 7-2 guy, but I watched him up close at the Mountain West tournament against Nevada. They end up losing the game, but he played really, really well.
He's a former top 50 recruit.
Top 50 recruit. Yeah, I don't think he's ever going to become that, really, but I think at Oregon State's level, to be able to just throw a 7-2 body out there for 20 to 25 minutes a night is really huge. And again, I relate it to Boston College because look at the coach. You have the national champion, Coach Joyner, who was drawing up game plans. I think he had the scout for the national title game, which beat Luke Murray's UConn team. It's really easy to sell to these guys. So like Deshaun Gorey from Fresno's there as well. And so is Avion Staten, a promising young big man from BYU. So they've been getting guys from each direction, both from the top of the sport and coming up from the lower levels. It's been a beautiful roster build so far. I would also point out San Diego. I don't know a ton yet about how they're going to play under J.R. Blount, but I know he's young at 38 years old. I know the program's really suffered during Steve Lavin's era. Steve Lavin goes down as the worst coach in the history of that program. And so they've invested, of course, in the practice facility. The WCC as a league has done pretty well the last few years. So places like San Diego and Pepperdine have an opportunity right now to really have a rebound season. They got the SWAC Freshman of the Year in there with Antonio Munoz. Dusty Schromer is a former Gonzaga contributor, played this last year for Grand Canyon. I think that's a nice pickup for a Torero program looking to bounce back. Davion Hill was pretty good at Ball State. Same with Kane coming over from Milwaukee. And I think Terry McMorris out of Eastern Illinois was their best player this year for the Panthers. So again, just a nice collection of guys for a place that, we haven't come to expect a whole lot out of. And now they might actually have some interesting wrinkles to their X's and O's. So I'm excited to see what that turns into, but we now know about 5 or 6 of their players. So that's pretty exciting. And I would also just say quickly, like the way Tennessee State ended the year last year, so far building with Daniel Verituk, who was at Memphis. He's obviously a big time. I think he's a former top 50 recruit. To play in the OVC is a pretty big deal. Isaiah Stewart, a promising talent from NIU coming over. And then DeAndre Lindsay from Iona, transferring to TSU. Just really, really love what Nolan Smith is doing there. And it's going to be fun to see him go up against Tobin. Well, he won't be going up against Tobin Anderson because they're going to the SoCon. But I'm looking right at Tennessee Tech's roster, and Tobin's added 5 guys, including Caleb Hollenbeck, who I think was one of Marshall's best shooters, if not their best shooter. And you look at Deontay Green coming over from South Florida. So again, Tennessee Tech could join the SoCon and be in the top 5 right away, which would be kind of crazy for fans to put their minds around because they've really struggled in a lower league. But this will be a whole new can of worms with a bigger budget under Tobin Anderson and joining the SoCon.
Yep, I am right there with you. And among the mid-major ranks, would you say that Tennessee Tech might be a top 5 team in terms of turnarounds this offseason? Because I love the hire of Tobin Anderson. Felt like he got a raw deal over there at Iona. You mentioned it. They just had guy after guy. And I feel like that's one of the more underrated stories in mid-major basketball, the way that Tennessee Tech has really decided that they're going to go up a level and they're going to spend like they're going up a level.
Well, yeah, part of the answer to your question is where did they leave off last year, right, for the biggest turnaround? And they left off at number 316, and Pomeroy, I think the net was similar to that. So they have a great chance, I think, to crack the top 150. I think if they're a top 5 SoCon team in most years, you're going to be in the top 150. And I do think the league, at least at the top, should correct a lot of misfortune from last year. Despite losing a number of players once again to the portal, I think they've really kind of figured it out financially a little bit. And I've had the opportunity to meet and connect with Tennessee Tech's new athletic director. His name's Casey Fox. He came from Montana State. I think a lot of people in basketball circles don't realize that Tennessee Tech went undefeated in football last year. So he had a big influence early to help put the right football coach in place. And they expect to go undefeated next year and be a top 10 FCS football program. And they've now got commitment to the basketball program for the first time. And it's unfortunate for John Pelfrey. He didn't get dealt that same hand. He had 6 really tough years there. But now with Tobin Anderson and with a new conference and with football kind of on top of the mountain as we speak, it bodes really, really well for the immediate future of Golden Eagle basketball.
Yep, I'm right there with you. There's so much excitement to be taking a look at right now in the off season. And I know you, Rocco, you're doing a ton right now. You're going to be doing a lot with regards to helping these teams out with scheduling, which obviously a little bit tough right now because we're not knowing these rosters, but you're keeping your finger on all that because once these rosters do get fortified, you go into scheduling mode, you help out these teams all throughout the off season. You've got so much knowledge over there at bracketeer.org. And I know you've added a few guys, Robbie Lucella and Avetta Aberman, who they joined this podcast in the last 10 days. They're doing a great job along with you. So let the good people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
That's awesome. I'm glad you've had them on. They work hard at it and They love the game just like we do, Greg. So it's great. Right here at bracketeer.org is the mothership. It's the platform for scheduling headquarters throughout the off season. I think it's beginning early May at this point because of the portal delaying scheduling a little bit. We'll start releasing the larger leagues, which will be the SEC, Big 12, Big 10, and then we'll go from there. But it'll be a great way to just track from May through September as games get announced, and I'll also be tweeting those when I'm able to. Sometimes I have to keep things a little bit under wraps, but that's at Rocco Miller 8. ROCCOMILLER 8, both Blue Sky and X/Twitter. And outside of Bracketeer, helping with Basket Under Review, Trilly Donovan's website. I just released this month exclusive interviews with new Belmont head coach Evan Brads. It's been a really cool conversation. If you missed that, go back and check it out. It's posted about in the last week. And then earlier in April, sat down with new St. Mary's coach Mickey McConnell. So I think next up, we'll get Randy Bennett on from Arizona State to connect all those dots. And then I'll probably just continue either interviewing coaches or conference commissioners as we're trying to get to the business end of college basketball on how rosters come together, how schedules come together, how leagues make decisions that impact basketball, and really try to make it more of like a Tom Rinaldi type of approach. So again, that's what I'm striving for over on that platform. And appreciate your support across the board, and we'll keep it rolling.
Absolutely. I always loved Tom Rinaldi back in the day as well. So I love to be able to hear that. And Rocco, I always love to have him aboard because he's such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to college basketball. Does a great job following this game all 12 months out of the year and always makes us smarter. So a big thanks to Rocco for joining me on Cusco Seeps, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming next, how about if we give to you guys a recap of the news and notes we saw in college basketball on Sunday? And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Cusco Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peters, and now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It's always a pleasure to be joined by Rocco Miller. He does such great work over at bracketeer.org, looking at this amazing sport of basketball every single time he joins me. He lends such great insights, and he did so once again today. So a big thanks to Rocco for joining me in last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast that I give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. For Dayton, they're really getting involved in the transfer portal. Already picked up Jalen Haynes and Travis Perry. I thought that those were good moves. Now they pick up Tristan Bilt for Duff, who he comes over from Murray State. I don't think that there's going to be a ton from him, but Zay Lowry intrigues me. He played the first 11 games of the season over at Marquette. He was averaging about 8.5 points, just under 2 assists per contest, 6'5", a little bit of a combo player. Never has been necessarily an amazing three-point shooter, career of about 33.8%. And after he storms off the Marquette, shall we say, roster, you have to have a little bit of question mark there, but seems like a high upside guy there. Tristan Ford, he was a redshirt over at Murray State. He had a little bit of fanfare coming out of the state of Illinois. Should be able to give a little bit more three-point shooting after Dayton. They were a bit lackadaisical last year with regards to their three-point shooting, but overall, I do like both of these moves, and I do think that for Dayton, things are very much on the up and up for them. And then the WCC pipeline, it does continue for Arizona State. They obviously bring in Randy Bennett, and now they've got Joe Foxwell, who's going to be coming on over from Portland. Portland is not necessarily a team that lit the world on fire, but they did knock off Gonzaga last year. And for Foxwell, as a freshman, he really was good for that Portland team. 15.5 points, 4.5 boards, 6.5 assists per game. He's actually from Australia. So Randy Bennett sticking with those international guys. He's already got Emmanuel Incente coming on over from Gonzaga. Marcus Vaughns is an upside guy from LSU, Nate Garcia is a 7-footer that follows his coach Rick Croy on over from Cal Baptist. So I do think that there's quite a bit of upside with this. I think that this is a solid move. Don't know if he's ever going to be a guy that completely lights the world on fire at the Big 12 level, but still, I think that that's a risk worth taking. If nothing else, they've got themselves a relatively good, versatile depth piece, so I like what they're doing here. And how about Boston College? They hire on Luke Murray in the offseason. Now they've got Brandon Benjamin, who's coming on over from Fairfield. He was really good this last year, double-double machine, 14.2 points, 7.4 rebounds per game, 6'8". I don't know if he's going to be averaging a double-double out there in the ACC, but it's very clear that Boston College, they're looking to be able to put some money into this thing. Ernest Shelton was rock solid over at Merrimack, 16-plus point per game scorer. Kobe Duggan is also now coming over as well. That was another one that came out on Sunday, as they already had Muddy Williams, a 19-plus point per game scorer coming out over from Montana. For Duggan, he was limited by injury this last year, only averaged 9.5 points per game over at Charleston. His three-point shooting was 34% 2 seasons ago over at Campbell. And you'll look at what he did at Campbell in the back half of the 2024-25 season. When it came to Coastal Conference play, 19.8 points per game, just completely dominated games. So if he can get back to that sort of health and that sort of level, they're really looking at something. But I believe in Luke Murray as a coach. I do think that he's getting things a little bit more back online for what has been a program that has not had a lot to cheer about for a very, very long time. So that, I think, was a good hire for them, and I feel like they're doing a great job here in the transfer portal here in the offseason. Not sure if Boston College lights the world on fire this season, but it's clear they're looking much better. And then how about another guy that transferred from Portland, Makai Balu? He last year was averaging for them 8.5 points, shot about 33.6% from 3-point, 6'5", a little bit of a combo player, began his life out there in California. He heads back to the state for CSUN, Cal State Northridge. This is their first pickup in the portal, so they're going to need to add in there a few other guys, but played at a very up-tempo style for Portland. CSUN has been a really good team on the glass, so I have to think that they're going to be looking for a little bit more rebounding moving forward, but that's a good first piece for them. They were a little bit shaky with their backcourt play last season. That should be able to help out quite a bit. Dylan Faulkner, he heads on over to Clemson, and this just feels like a really good Clemson ad. Clemson last year was greater than the sum of its parts team. That was really good down low and on the glass, and Faulkner, I think, can really provide that. Began his career over at Lipscomb. He followed his coach, Lenny Acuff, on over to Samford, and over at Sam Amford, 17 points, 8.5 boards. Not a guy that's going to pop it from three, and Clemson last year was a little bit shaky at the free throw line, and you do shoot less than 65% at the charity stripe, so that's going to need to get worked on a little bit, but still, he fits the system really well. I think that this is a nice ad for them, and I do think that for Clemson, with them also adding Cole Kurta, they're off to a nice start here this offseason, and this program is off to a nice start as well. How about Zion Medley? He was over at Kent State. Now, Kent State had their turnover issues, and East Carolina has been a really rough team, both with their three-point shooting offense and defense, but for Zion Medley, last season, 10.5 points, 6.5 assists per game. East Carolina has been really lacking a main facilitator for the longest of time. He's going to need to clean up the turnovers a little bit, but for East Carolina, at the very least, they now know that they've got a point guard, so that's good for them. How about Eastern Kentucky getting on the board for a few transfers? Damon King comes over from Rhode Island, and you had Chadrick Lassu coming over from Long Island. Lassu is a guy that I'm really interested by because 2 years ago, he had himself a really nice year over at Long Island. Last year, a little bit more of a diminished role. This last year, 5.2 points, 5.4 boards per contest, averaged 1.4 blocks per game in both years. Over at LIU in the previous year, was averaging more like 7.3 rebounds per game. Career about 35.5% three-point shooter at 6'9". Didn't necessarily pop a lot of threes, but I feel like he's a good ad for this Eastern Kentucky system. Now, Eastern Kentucky, they really lack the turnover ability that they have had in the past, so they're going to need to be able to address that a little bit. But for LIU, they were a solid team in terms of generating turnovers, so I'm not going to say that they were an amazing team in terms of generating turnovers, but I do think that there's a bit of upside there. And then when it comes to Damon King coming on over from Rhode Island, didn't see a lot of minutes for them, but he's a native of the state of Kentucky, had a little bit of fanfare coming out of high school, not necessarily the most highly touted guy in the world, didn't necessarily shoot it well from three-point range this last season, but I think that he can fill a role in that backcourt. Again, he's going to need to work on the active hands, but I feel like that could be able to work out for them. I think that this is going to work out for William and Mary as the Coach Earl pipeline continues, as I remember Dan Earl was able to do a really good job over at Cornell many years ago, and one of those guys that he had on his roster was Josh Baldwin. This last season played 26 games for Cornell, and averaged 7.5 points, shot 34% from three-point range, 4 boards, 3.2 assists per game. He's not a guy that does necessarily one thing amazing, but he does a little bit of everything. That is a William and Mary style. They bring him in. They've already got Nelvon Daniels, who comes over from Providence. Didn't see a lot of playing time there, but he's going to help with the guards, a little bit of facilitation. Trevon Blossom game is a guy that I thought should have seen a few more minutes over at Idaho. So I like what they've done here in the portal thus far. It's not necessarily like big sizzle items or anything like that, but that's not what this team needs. They're built around being a whole is greater than sum of its parts sort of team, and they are certainly living up to that right now. And for Wake Forest, they're looking for a ray of sunshine, and they hope to find it with Justin Ray. He was solid when he was over at Monmouth. Now, I don't think that this is going to be a guy that enters into Wake Forest and puts up massive numbers or anything like that, but he was a 42% three-point shooter. This last year was averaging 11.3 points per game after, as a freshman over at Monmouth, didn't really see a lot of playing time there. He did average a little bit over a steal per contest at 6'3". Is a little bit of a one-trick pony because he's not really going to be too much of a facilitator, but that's why you bring in KVR Kennedy, who was over at Merrimack. They've got upside with bringing in Jamari McDowell, who was over at Kansas. Just really didn't see a lot of playing time for them, but overall, I do like these moves, and I do think that there's quite a bit of upside with them. You've got Taj Bryant, who last year, he was over at Sacred Heart. He has decided that he is going to be going to Wagner. Wagner was really a nice three-point shooting team last season. Bryant last season only shot about 32% from three-point over at Sacred Heart, but his career about 34.5% three-point shooter. Wagner, always a very slow and controlled team. We did see their defense take a little bit of, shall we say, a nosedive this last season, so they're going to need to get that straightened out just a little bit, but still, I like this pickup for them. I think that he's going to be able to help them out and continue to improve that three-point shooting. And then you had Jake Feigen. He last season was really good over at Cornell. He was able to put in there for the team 17 points, 5 boards, pair of assists, shot 41.5% from three-point range, and he has decided that he is going to be going on over to Villanova, so they're getting a smart kid there. For Villanova, it was a little bit, shall we say, hit or miss with regards to the three-point shooting last season. Other than Duke Brandon, they didn't necessarily have a ton down low, and they're also going to be bringing in Devin Royal as well. That was also announced on Sunday, and that's going to be able to help out on that front a little bit as well. For Devin Royal, was very solid over at Ohio State this last year, 13.5 points, 5.5 boards, shot about 31.5% from three. He's got the versatility to pop it from three, not necessarily an amazing three-point shooter, and is he going to grab like a gob ton of second and third chances? No, but he's going to be able to help clean up the glass, not allow a lot of second and third chances to opponents. I feel like that 1-2 punch that Villanova picked up on Sunday, that's a very solid one, and I do think that there's a little bit of upside with them moving forward. I do think that there's a little bit of upside here with Florida State as well. They pick up Sebastian Rencic. He last season was over at Colorado. They already picked up Sean Abafe, a former top 50 recruit of Cincinnati. Anthony Robinson comes on over from Missouri. Cameron Taylor was a nice go-to scorer over at UNC Wilmington last season, and for Rencic, 12.5 points, 5.5 boards, about top 100 recruit. He comes over from Slovakia, so a little bit of an international man of mystery. 6'9", shot 33% from three, and it's very clear with Luke Vlogs, he has gone away from just having everything be a three-point shot. He really, I felt like, was able to turn the corner as a coach last season because he was very set in his ways to begin with. It wasn't working out for Florida State. He changed things around a little bit, and now he's really got things humming, in my opinion, for them. So good on them. That's a nice add for them. And for George Washington, they've gotten very active in the portal here over the last few days. They picked up Omari Witherspoon from Pittsburgh. Terrence Arsenault, I thought, was a great pickup. They've got Felix Carrasas coming over from Colorado. Now they pick up Dylan James from Georgia and Malachi Arrington from NJIT. Now with Dylan James, he wasn't necessarily a guy that was putting up massive numbers over at Georgia, to say the least, but he's going to be able to help fill a little bit of a role for this team. Last season when he was over at Georgia, 4.5 points per game. He's a former top 125 recruit, and he shot a paltry 5.9% for three-point just last season. Previous year was much better from three. He actually had shot at least 38.5% for three each of the previous 2 seasons, so we'll see what the real him is. But at 6'9", was able to give the team 4 boards, and being 6'9" and able to have that versatility, I think is going to fit this George Washington style very well. And then for Arrington, a little bit of a disappointing year this last year over at NJIT, about 4 points, 4 boards per contest. He was a part-time starter. He was really just a rim protector in general. He's a depth piece for George Washington, but that's what George Washington was really built around last year, just being like Noah's Ark, having 2 of everything. So if Arrington could give them anything whatsoever, be able to give this team a little bit of depth, which you just very rarely find outside the power conference level, that's going to be big for them. And how about what High Point is building? They're already bringing in Isaac Garrett from Oakland. I really love the pickup of Jason Rivera-Torres from Monmouth. Frank Juan Sherman is able to do a nice job down low. Now they pick up Liam Campbell to be able to help out in the backcourt, and for Campbell last season. He was playing over at St. Mary's. Wasn't necessarily a primary scorer, but at the same time, when he shot it, it went in. He shot 52% from three-point range off the bench, 5 points per contest, and it's really what High Point was able to do a very good job of last season, because you'll remember with High Point, the man that was able to lead them to the second round of the NCAA tournament was a man that had made 0 2-point shots throughout the entirety of the season, and Chase Johnson, he was just out there to be able to pop it from three. Now they have found the perfect replacement for him, because he had like 500 years of eligibility in college basketball. So I applaud them for being able to just try to be able to find what gave them success last season, try to be able to build around that, and just know who they are as a team. And then for Indiana, they have been very active here in the transfer portal. They pick up Marcus Burton from Notre Dame, Aiden Sherrill from Alabama, Samat Yitzhaglu, he comes over from SMU, and now they're picking up Bryce Lindsey, who he was over at Villanova this last season. And for Bryce Lindsey, got off to a really nice start to the season. He had a little bit of a nosedive towards the back half of the season, but still was able to average about 12.5 points per game, shot 35.5% from three-point range. I like what Indiana is building right now. I do think that they're doing a solid job in terms of finding guys that can go out there and score, because last season the defense was relatively okay. They needed to be a little bit better down low. They've done a good job bringing in the likes of Sherrill and company in terms of being able to help out that low post play, and now being able to bring in a guy like a Bryce Lindsey that should be able to help out quite a bit in the backcourt. Jacksonville State is now on the board with a pair of transfers. Leon Horner, the third, he comes on over from Texas Tech after he really didn't see a lot of minutes whatsoever. I'd be very surprised if he's going to be able to give a ton of production, but still a guy that was able to give the team 2.5 points, shot 36.5% from three-point range. Jacksonville State has become a nice three-point shooting team over the last few seasons, and they're hoping that Cash Pollock, Cash with K, is going to be able to come over from Arizona State and give a little bit of production after he was pretty much glued to the benches last season at 6'10", really wasn't able to get out there. And for Jacksonville State, they did take a little bit of a, shall we say, dive with regards to rebounding last season. They're looking to be able to get back to happy. They're looking to be able to do a good job on the glass once again. I think that this is a very good step in terms of restoring a little bit of order there and a little bit of roar, so I like this, and I do love this move for LaSalle. They've been active here in the transfer portal, picking up Trey Moss from George Washington. Vince Zenke, who comes over from Niagara, has some versatility, and now they pick up Anthony Finkley, who is over at St. Joe's, and Cam Burton from Stone Cold Stephen F. Austin. For Cam Burton, he was able to be a nice 42.5% three-point shooter. I mean, he was a little bit of a one-trick pony guy for the team, averaging about 8 points per game, but trust me, LaSalle, with how bad they were from three-point range and just in general on offense, they need any sort of help that they can get whatsoever. And then for Finkley, he was a part of a rock-solid defense for St. Joe's, and really both of these guys, in terms of Burton and Finkley, they were a part of teams that were ranked in the top 70 nationally in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, so it's going to help them be able to just beef it up a little bit more down low. So I really do like both of these ads, and they should be able to add a little bit of rough and tumble for this team. And with Finkley, last year, 5.5 points, 3.5 boards, 6-6 combo player, career about 33.5% three-point shooter. I think that he's going to be able to help this team out as well. And then for Utah, they've been adding quite a few guys here over the last few days, as now they pick up Malik Goma, who is over at Weber State, along TJ Birch. They've already added Jackson Holcomb and Tayson Chapman from Ohio State, so I think that they did a great job there. And then for TJ Birch, last season when he was over at Wright State, and he was a solid player, 12.5 points, 3.5 assists, shot about 35% from three-point, career 38.5% three-point shooter. When he was at Ball State, he, in a small sample size, shot 56% from three. Not sure if he's going to be like some sort of dynamo at the Big 12 level, but for Utah, they were really lacking depth last season, so if that's a little bit of a depth piece, that's good there, and I think that Goma should be that as well. He was over at Weber State last year, 8.7 boards, did shoot 40% from three. I'm not going to say that it was on high volume whatsoever. I think they took 5 threes last season, but still, he's able to give you a little bit of something there. He's got a little bit of a mid-range game as well, so Utah, they add some nice ancillary pieces. If they're looking to add a little bit more and they're able to build off of this, I think that they're solid. If these are supposed to be guys that are seeing a whole bunch of minutes and are supposed to be taking the team to the promised land, well, the promised land is probably not going to be had, so we'll see what they're going to be able to do moving forward, but they're on the board with a few guys, and that is going to be able to help them out quite a bit. And how about Tarleton State, as they're going to be moving off of Billy Gillespie, and I'd like this pickup for them. Caleb Blackwell, he was very good at the non-Division I level a few seasons ago, began his career over at Alabama A&M. Rock solid player from Utah, 10.5 points, 1.3 steals per contest. Even with Gillespie out of the fold, it looks like they're still going to be looking to generate a lot of turnovers. He was a part of a Utah a team that is very much in their identity. Last season shot about 36.5% from three-point range. Tarleton State is going to need to find a main point guard because of their just system in general. They always have a tough time in terms of taking care of the ball, so they're going to need to do a little bit of a better job there. But still, I think that this is a good ad for them. He very much is going to be able to fit the system. And for Duke, they finally get on the board with an ad. They bring in Drew Skronowski, who he was solid over at Belmont this past season. I don't think that he's going to be a guy that is going to be leading Duke to a national title or anything like that, but nice versatility here, about 10.5 points, 6 boards. He was able to give out 2.5 assists per game as well, right around about 6'9" or so he does have some nice versatility. He's going to be one of those guys that they bring in as a veteran to be able to help guys out, much like a Malik Brown, who they've had the last few seasons. Is he going to be a guy that's going to be taking the place of a lot of these freshmen or anything like that? No, but at the same time, I do think that this is a solid ad. Gives them a little bit more experience as they do lose quite a few guys from this past season, so I like that for them. Ben Godak, he last season was over at Colorado, 11.5 points, 6.5 boards. Not a guy that really popped it from 3 at 6'9", but he has landed with Vanderbilt. For Vanderbilt, they're starting to get into it here in the portal as they were a little bit slow out the gates, but now they've been able to get a few nice signings up on the board. And for Vanderbilt, they're going a little bit bigger as well. They were pretty solid on the glass this past season, but appears as though that's a little bit of a emphasis this offseason. Brickue Butunsel is coming over from Nebraska. They've already added Ace Glass as well, so they're probably going to need to add a little bit more shooting, add a little bit more to the backcourt, but still do think that they've had a few nice ads, so that's going to be able to help them out as well. And then how about Elijah Freeman? He last season was over at Auburn, and he has decided that he is going to be going to Texas. For Texas, they haven't necessarily picked up, shall we say, a large quantity of guys, but some nice quality. Amari Evans is another guy that's going to be coming in from Tennessee as well. That's newly minted for them. For Amari Evans, wasn't able to see a ton of minutes over at Tennessee, was averaging about 4 points, 3 boards at 6'5", really didn't pop it well from 3, but he should be able to help out a defense that wasn't necessarily the greatest this last season, and Freeman left something to be desired on defense as well, but I mean, he's a 6'8", little bit of a wing, shot 34.5% from 3, 9 points, 5 boards, so I do like what he's going to be able to bring to the table. They're already bringing in Isaiah Johnson, who's a really nice scorer coming on off the bench from Colorado. David Punch, he's going to be able to help them out on defense as well, so it appears as though Texas has very much taken an approach of adding a little bit more on the defensive side of things as well, so you like to be able to see that for them. And then Deshaun Good, he hopes to be Mr. Good for the Miami Hurricanes. He last season was very nice out there in the Ryerson League. 15 points, 8.5 boards. Guy stands right in that neighborhood about like 6'7", 6'8" or so. Shot 57% from three-point range, albeit it wasn't necessarily the biggest volume in the world, but still 63 threes, and he shot 57% from three-point range. That's a nice ad for a Miami team that was a little bit on cold from three-point range this last season, but they were really good on the glass. He's going to be able to help them out with that regard. They've already brought in Samatachu Cyril. He was over at Georgia, really good shot blocker. Arcaden Lewis from Villanova as well. So I love this pickup for them. And then for Texas Tech, it's not necessarily a guy that's going to be like a complete game breaker for them or anything like that, but Demarion Dennis, he comes on over from Wyoming. Dennis this last season, he was a solid player over at Wyoming. He was thrown in there about 11.5 points per contest from three-point range, shot about 34% from 3. I don't think that he's going to be any sort of a game breaker or anything like that, but we did notice that Texas Tech last year was a little bit, shall we say, more fragile on defense. He should be a depth piece. He could be a little bit more of a defensive stopper for them, so I think that that's a nice add as well. And then you had Devin Arlington. He last season was playing over at Yale, and he is going to be staying in the northeast part of the country. He goes to Stonell. Not a guy that saw a lot of minutes last year, was averaging about 3 points, 2 boards per contest, but shot about 34% from three-point range. Guy that had a little bit of, shall we say, recruitment coming out of the state of California. You know that he's a smart kid, so I do think that this is going to be another ad that's going to be pretty solid for them. And I do feel like for Stonell, they're a little bit on the up and up right now. You'd like to see them add a few more pieces, but right now, that's pretty solid. And then you've got St. Bonaventure adding guys as well. They're adding a lot of guys from the Division II ranks because of the coaching change that we saw in the offseason, but they're also adding in their Mason Blackwood as well, 6'7", a little bit of combo player from Penn State, which Penn State really didn't play any defense whatsoever, but he's going to be able to help stretch the floor a little bit. And then Ryan Callenby, he was at Detroit last season for Callenby, right around about 4 points, 5 rebounds per game. game, though. So if St. Bonaventure is looking to be able to just clog up the glass in general, I do think that they're going to be able to have some success there. And for St. Bonaventure, it certainly is quite a bit of a passing of the torch because Dr. Schmidt, he's not out of the fold. They bring in a guy, Mike McDonald, who had all sorts of success at the Division II level, but is that going to be able to translate? We've seen it work out for so many of these teams, like for CSUN, obviously, we have seen what has happened with Ben McCollum and company, so it has been a blueprint for success. We do need to see a little bit here because it is a little bit tough to be able to recruit to Olean, New York, but as we know, it's also a really good home court advantage as well, so it's got its drawbacks, it's got its advantages, and we'll see what happens with them moving forward. And then I like this one for South Carolina. Alexis Baluskis, hopefully I got that correct. He comes over from the great state of Wisconsin. He last season, about 5 points, 4.5 rebounds per game. Showed some flashes of brilliance. Comes over from Lithuania at 6'10", was shooting at about 34.5% from three. And it's very clear, South Carolina, after they were awful with their three-point shooting last season, they are looking to address that. They are going to be looking to pop it and lock it from three. They had it in their Cameron Heidi, who is shooting in the high 30s/low 40s from three-point range over at Texas. Corey Mincy was a nice go-to scorer over at George Mason, so they have attacked that quite heavily. And for South Carolina State, they're on the board. They pick up Deshaun Jackson, who last season he was a solid player over at Mercier. 6 points, 3 boards, 3 assists per game. Doesn't necessarily do one thing great, and it's not going to give you a lot of three-point shooting, but South Carolina State, one of the worst teams at taking care of the ball in all of college basketball. They were a careless team with regards to their defense. Being able to add in there a guy like Deshaun Jackson from a Mercier team that, they were a rock-solid team last year. I'm not going to go out here and say that they lit the world on fire or anything like that, but this is a sign of things going in the right direction, so I do like what they're doing there. And how about for San Diego? They pick up a pair of nice guys on Sunday as well. They've already added in there Dusty Stromer, a former top 75 recruit of Grand Canyon and Gonzaga. Terry McMorris, a go-to rebounder, top rebounder over at Eastern Illinois, and now they're going to be able to have a little bit more down low as Saku Kona. He was over at UW Milwaukee last season, and he gave the team about 6.5 points, 4.5 boards. Not a guy that's going to go out there, pop it from three, but San Diego last year was one of the worst rebounding teams under Steve Lavin last season. They're having a little bit of a changing of the guard at the coach. It's very clear that they want to restore some order down low, and then they add with them Davion Hill. He was over at Ball State, and Ball State was a disappointing team last year, but he was very versatile, was able to stuff the stat sheet for the team, 2.5 assists, 4.5 boards, 14 points, shot about 34% from three-point. They're hoping that Stromer can be that three-point shooter that he was coming out of high school with Antonio Munoz coming on over from Grambling. They've built themselves a nice roster to this point. They're still going to need to add a few more guys, but I do think that they've had themselves a nice start here in the offseason, and I do think that things are very much on the up and up for them. And when it comes to Pittsburgh, they're looking to get a little bit more mighty as they add in their Armani mighty, and boy, oh boy, these guys have been active in the transfer portal. Alan Sumler, a nice go-to scorer over at Charleston Southern last year. Nathan George, a main facilitator of Georgia Tech and Syracuse. Bane Dongo from Georgia Tech. Jonathan Boom Boom Powell. So it's been just sort of a resting spot for a lot of these guys formerly of the ACC. Armani mighty actually began his career over at Boston College, was able to have a nice second act over at Mercer this last season where he supplied that team with 13 points, 10.5 boards. He's back in the ACC for Pittsburgh. It's very clear that Pittsburgh is looking to go all in. This is transfer portal 2.0 for them. Jaleel Bethea, a former top 30 recruit, is coming in, so I have to question whether or not there's going to be any sort of camaraderie whatsoever with these guys, but it's very clear that they're bringing in guys, so at the very least, they're going for it there. And how about Pepperdine? Already added in there Evan Haywood, who is a nice go-to guy over at Butler. He was able to put in there some numbers. Anthony Robinson, he was over in the Big East last year over at Xavier. Peter Mistrovich, double-figure scorer over at Long Beach State, and now they had Will McClendon. Pretty much missed all of last season due to injury. You look at him last over at San Jose State 2 years ago, 12 points per game, shot 35% from three, former top 100 recruit of UCLA, where he just wasn't able to get out there on the floor, but even at San Jose State, he was able to give out about 3 assists per game. Pepperdine is making some good moves right now. I don't know if it necessarily pans out this season for them, but it's very clear that they are going for it. I applaud them for the moves, and these are very clearly steps in the right direction. Then another former North Texas player in Kamat Crosby, he decides that he is going to be going to Omaha, set hike, and for Crosby last season, more of an ancillary guy, 2.5 points per game, shot about 35% from three-point range, but I think that he's going to be a good fit with that Omaha system. He's a guy that is going to be able to give them a little bit of three-point shooting, much of what they had when they were able to make the NCAA tournament 2 seasons ago. So I think that that's a nice add for them. And what else is nice is the fact that things are becoming a little bit more clear in terms of what we're getting this offseason. And I'm looking to be able to break it down right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And a big thanks to our good friend, Rocco Miller. He does such great work over at Bracketeer.org. He joined me in the last segment. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, there's they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way, that is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I am indeed with you guys every single day on this podcast. We've went over 2,300 straight days without a missed podcast here in the offseason. We're going to be recapping all these transfer moves, keep you updated with regards to the news that is happening around this great sport. And once things become a little bit more clear with the portal, I'm going to get you guys a specialized conference preview podcast for every one of these conferences. And then once we get back in season picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. So appreciate you tuning in today, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.